All right. I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on wrong page. On AO 2020-83, decreasing the cost of residential development and support affordability of housing construction by easing the use of municipal rights of way through amendments to Anchorage Municipal Code Title 24. Let's go ahead and do a roll call of assembly members.
Miss Allard?
Here.
Mr. Constant? Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Presberdia?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davison?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
And Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. As usual, if members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat. And if you can't access the chat, please text me and I'll add you in there. So I'm going to go ahead and see if either Mr. Weddleton or Mr. Dunbar want to set the stage before the presentation, or if we just want to move on to the presentation.
I can speak briefly.
Go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, so this ordinance addresses some things that have come from various developers, home builders, and then ACS. And, you know, we have an incredible asset in our rights of way, you know, not just for driving, but lots of utilities go there, landscaping and so on. And using them in, I mean, we need to protect them. And I think the administration will make a very strong case for that there's huge value there and we can't let them be destroyed. But they can also be used to lower the cost of development in Anchorage. And this is kind of attempt in just a couple ways to do that, to bring really good benefits, you know, faster internet to homes that need it, a little bit cheaper homes and quicker building and so on. You know, using that right away without, you know, while covering the, you know, any potential harm, you know, to that municipal asset. So we'll start off with the administration kind of presenting, kind of outlining those issues fairly thoroughly. And then we'll have a presentation from ACS looking at microtrenching, and then Alaska Home Builders have some people here who will be able to speak on the driveway issues and so on. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Before I turn it over to our presentations, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to state for the record that as an individual who is employed by AT&T, I am investigating as to whether or not I have a conflict with this ordinance, specifically the whereas statements concerning 5G, even though the microtrenching is not something that AT&T does. I did want to state that I will be consulting with the Ethics Council on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. For the purposes of this work session, I'm going to go ahead and make the presumption that you do have a conflict until we hear from further from your investigation, just to be in the clear.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Does that mean I need to drop off of this meeting?
You can continue listening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to our first presentation from Mr. Dole or Mr. Colhase.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Assembly. This is Kent Colhase, Director of PM&E. Is everyone able to hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay,
so we, Bob Dole and I we're going to do a tag team approach, and it sounds like there's also a presentation pending from ACS or Alaska Communications, so I'll try to move quickly. I'm going to speak to the microtrenching portion of the proposed ordinance, and then Bob will speak to the right-of-way permitting portion. So I've got a presentation here. I'm going to share. Are folks able to see the screen? The presentation?
No, we are not. Right now I have Mr. John Snelson. I'm seeing him, but I'm not able to see your presentation.
Let me try.
I'm not
one
really
more
seeing
time.
Mr. Snelson. I'm seeing an empty right-of-way permit counter. There we go. Now I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I thought it'd be helpful to start off. I'm sure most folks are familiar with just a brief touch on what is microtrenching, and I'm sure Alaska Communications will go into it more in depth, but it's a method of installing conduit and fiber optic or other fiber in the road surface, typically in a narrow trench, 2 to 4 inches wide and 10 to 12 to 24 inches deep. The conduit is installed and then it's backfilled with a variety of materials. The picture on the right is just a graphic depiction of what a microtrenching installation could look like, with the conduit at the bottom and then some type of concrete or epoxy fill above that. The material that backfills the trench is called reinstatement material. Generally, this has a lower cost than the traditional method of installing utilities like this behind the curb and sidewalk or in easements in a typical trench. The picture on the lower left shows some typical equipment. The tractor with the saw behind it. It's a 3 or so foot diameter saw that cuts a narrow trench, as you see on the right. These are not from Anchorage. These are pictures I took off of the internet. And then the upper right picture is an industry picture showing a finished trench with looks like an old style cell phone beside it. So what is our position on microtrenching in municipalities? We certainly recognize the benefits. We've been in discussions with ACS, or Alaska Communications, for well over a year on this. And last year, we agreed to a couple of pilot projects on municipal streets. And then this summer, we have agreed with them that we are open to considering a broader testing implementation program. We think that we would need a written agreement between Alaska Communications and the municipality to do that. And in fact, they provided a draft agreement to us here maybe 2 weeks or so ago, and we are in the process of reviewing that, and we'll provide comments and work back and forth with them on that. Our concerns are that anytime you cut into the road surface, you have the potential for long-term negative impacts that ultimately cost money, and it's an impact to street maintenance, and ultimately could be a cost impact to taxpayers, and that's our concerns are cost and protecting the infrastructure. Why do we care? This is a cross-section of a typical street in Anchorage. This is the standard we typically build to: an asphalt surface, a couple inches of leveling gravel, 6 inches of what we call type 2A classified backfill, which is generally 3-inch or smaller material. And then below that, type 2, which is 8-inch or smaller material. And that lower level can be 24 to 48 inches deep, depending on what the conditions are, the type of soil underneath, the amount of water in the soil, things like that. And then you can see there's storm drain, there's water, there's sewer that are typically located within the road prism or just adjacent to it, and then gas and electric. So what's happened in Anchorage so far? There's been several, I guess at least a couple attempts at microtrenching. The first was Cinnabar Loop in 2012. It was a different provider and a different installer, and certainly some older technology. And then last summer, Alaska Communications did a demonstration project in their parking lot over off of near New Sagaya, and they did 2 pilot projects on municipal streets, one on Bering Street near the Fleet facility and one on Mackenzie Drive over off of Wisconsin and Arrow. Cinnabar Loop, we've looked at that carefully, and it has significant issues. It is essentially the entire installation along Cinnabar Loop is in a state of failure. Here's some pictures of it that were taken last year. You can see that there's been erosion of the reinstatement material, separation of the reinstatement material. The pen in the center spans the gap, and that's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. The asphalt and curb are 1 inch to 1.5 inches higher than the reinstatement trench, which is settled and eroded. Alaska Communications parking lot demonstration last year was attended by us and representatives of industry and other government agencies. I don't have pictures of that. What I observed there, which was of concern, is the graphic depiction on the lower right. The lower left shows what a microtrenching installation hypothetically would look like. Vertical trench, which would be very easy to backfill. What we saw on the Alaska Communications demonstration was what we call undercutting. Both the curb and gutter, the trench was installed at the line between the gutter and the pavement. So both the curb and gutter and the pavement were undercut significantly. I could stick my hand under the asphalt 6 to 8 inches in many places. And why that's of concern is when you backfill a trench or a hole, you need to make sure that you have complete coverage and well-compacted soil. Otherwise, we'll see settling in the long term, and settling leads to water infiltration and ultimately failure. Bering Street, these are pictures taken of the Bering Street installation that was done last year. These pictures were taken a couple weeks ago. We've provided these to Alaska Communications, and in fairness, they acknowledged that they were concerned going into this that the asphalt in this area was thinner than they like to work in. But nonetheless, you can see the picture on the left, the reinstatement material has separated on both sides from the adjacent asphalt. And on the right, the sealant material on the top of the trench is failing. Mackenzie Drive was probably the big pilot project they did last year, several hundred feet of microtrenching installed between the curb and gutter and the asphalt. There were some installation issues that we observed, and there are some performance issues that we've observed after looking at it here this summer. Installation issues, the two pictures on the left are places where the installation trenched through concrete sidewalks. And you can see that the finish work is relatively poor. One concern, we have a couple concerns here. One is that, again, those joints would allow water infiltration. Another concern is that work does not meet the standards for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's a bit of a conundrum, although we know we have sidewalks in town that exist that don't comply. Newark is supposed to comply, and that opens the municipality up to liability. And in fact, we've had, not on this project, but we've had recent discussions involving the municipal attorney's office and concerned constituents about other work that has not complied with the ADA Act. So we're concerned about that. The picture on the far right just depicts an area where they were installing behind the sidewalk, and you can see that the machine got off track and chewed into the sidewalk for a half or so length of a sidewalk panel. Again, on Mackenzie Drive, the picture on the left, this is between the curb and the pavement, and again, the machine got off track and chewed into the curb. The picture on the right is another joint through a concrete surface, and you can see the finished quality of that work is probably not where we would like to see it. More installation pictures, and this is another area of concern. The depictions, the graphic depictions that we've been provided and the representations that you find from industry on the internet are a very clean, crisp edge on both sides. And in fact, what we saw is on almost the full length of Mackenzie is the asphalt was torn up like this. This is taken after the trenching operation and after they backfilled a portion of the trench, but not to the surface. And the asphalt was severely is a subjective term, it was damaged. And the concern is that with damage like this, it's more difficult to get a clean, waterproof, high quality joint between the reinstatement material and the existing concrete or the existing curb and gutter. And the less refined the joint is, the less clean the installation is, the more opportunity there is for separation, settlement, and infiltration of water. These are more pictures showing similar issues that resulted during the installation. And what we believe happened is, as I described in the picture showing the cross section of an anchored street, is that 4 inches down, we have 3-inch and smaller cobbles, and 10 inches down, we have 8-inch and smaller cobbles. And it appears that the trenching machine, rather than cutting that material, just raised it up through the trench, and that's what resulted in this damage that we see. So those are installation concerns we have. And with respect to performance of the Mackenzie Drive installation over the last winter, this is the picture on the left is an area, I was out there last week and looked at this. This is an area with some sealant in place, and I noticed the gaps along the edge of the sealant. So I was able to pick that entire length of sealant up and move it over, which is the picture you see on the right. So again, another opportunity for water infiltration. More performance issues. The picture on the left shows a similar gap along the sealant where water could get in. This was bound more tightly to the substrate. I wasn't able to lift it up. And the picture on the right, the left-hand side of the seam, the left-hand seam of the picture on the right, you can see a small separation there, which again would allow water infiltration. We've looked into this in addition to talking with Alaska Communications. We've done some independent research. There's not a lot of independent objective research available on the internet that we could find. There was a study in Alberta the study was in 2017. The field work predated that. It appears to be focused mainly on how the fiber performs in the roadway as opposed to the road integrity. But the study did show that there was quite a bit of movement of the installed conduit and reinstatement material. We do know that the installation method was different than what is used now, and the materials were different, but that was the best information we were able to find. We have talked with DOT here in Anchorage, and Alaska code requires a 48-inch bury depth, and they to date have told us they have no interest in changing that code requirement. So their codes would not allow microtrenching to occur in a road surface. And then the final point on research, we were informed by Alaska Communications and their contractor who's installing this system, that Eagan, Minnesota was somebody we should talk to because they've had recent experience with microtrenching. So I talked with the Public Works Director of Eagan this week, and he said that their installation there was a different telecom, of course, but the conduit was installed in the asphalt surfacing. They have typically 4 inches as opposed to our 2 to 3 inches. So they installed it in the asphalt as opposed to buried below. They had some issues during installation. The installation contractor substituted some material that ultimately failed, and they did that substitution without approval. The installer also assured them that for maintenance purposes, if they needed to come in and rotomill a street, which is removing part or all of the asphalt surface for repaving, that it would not affect the conduit. And when Eagan did their first maintenance project that involved rotomilling, it tore up both the conduit and the fiber, damaged it significantly to the point that the telecom provider in those locations elected to remove the conduit from the road and install it behind the sidewalk in the typical excavated trench system. So our concerns are, as I talked about at the beginning, maintenance. If we need to repave, if we need to do a rotomill or a mill and pave, we're concerned about our ability to do that. We don't want to increase the maintenance costs. We are also concerned with the current installation between the asphalt surfacing and the curb and gutter. We're concerned about the ability to replace or repair curb and gutter. Street maintenance has an extensive program every year where they're out repairing or replacing sections of curbing that have cracked or failed. And both street maintenance, whom I've talked with extensively about this, and the concrete installing industry in Anchorage, Paul Van Lanningham has spoken with several of them. They have said pretty bluntly that they would not be able to remove and replace a section of curb with this microtrenching adjacent to it. So that, again, is a cost concern. We're concerned about the long-term viability and the potential to damage to streets. And we're concerned about the cost to the citizens, the taxpayers, if there's a failure. And in general, the fewer cuts you have on an asphalt surface, the better off you are. We can drive around town and look at utility trenches and water installations and everything else, and where there are cuts, you increase the chance of failure. The final concern we have, I think, is that that once a telecom installs a shallow utility like this in the road surface, it becomes what we call the dominant utility. And any other utility that's deeper becomes a subordinate utility, and they're challenged then by coordinating with or working around the telecom installation in order to do work. So that would be water, sewer, storm drain, possibly gas, possibly electric, although they're typically a little further outside the road prism. But water, sewer, and gas have mains, they have laterals that serve homes. We all know that AWU in particular has an extensive program of reconstructing and repairing their infrastructure. So that's a concern to us. This is not a picture related to microtrenching. This is the Arctic and Chester Creek culvert that was replaced this summer. And I think folks may have heard about the car that went around several road closed signs and drove into the creek. But I put this in here because it reminded me that we did have some repairs on Providence Drive last year and Northern Lights this year where Chester Creek crosses them. And both of those came to our attention through road failures, and they could have been quite severe. We were able to catch them early enough and install some temporary shoring to prevent a failure. And certainly a microtrenching failure would not result in anything like this, but sometimes failures go unobserved until they fail to the point where it's a challenge financially and logistically to repair them. So for the proposed ordinance, we are not entirely sure we understand the full intent. It says the preferred method, so we're not sure exactly what that would mean. If it's a mandate for microtrenching, we have concerns, and those concerns are based on the information I've just provided. If it doesn't preclude traditional solutions, trenching behind the sidewalk or in easements, at the municipality's discretion, we are certainly supportive of continuing to explore microtrenching. That is the extent of my presentation, and in the interest of time, I want to make sure that folks have a chance to ask questions of me and then allow time for Mr. Dole and Alaska Communications to talk as well.
Thank you. So I think I'll turn it over to the sponsors to see if they have any comments, but I think it might behoove the assembly to get all of the information before we go into full discussion mode. So Mr. Weddleton or Mr. Dunbar, did you have any brief comments?
I think that was a great presentation, and I'd recommend just moving on. I think at this point, perhaps it might be best to have the ACS present because it follows immediately Kent's, but Felix, I'd leave that up to you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to ACS's presentation.
Hey, good morning. This is Heather Kavanaugh. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having us today, and thank you to the Anchorage Assembly members for your time. I serve as the Director of External Affairs and Corporate Communication at Alaska Communications, and with me here is a colleague, Bobby Stone, who serves as our Director of Outside Plant, which is basically construction. So I'm going to share our presentation with you. You should be able to see it now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, thank you. So today we want to talk about the goal, potential sites for microtrenching, a site map example, talk about the Mackenzie Drive example and the permit process that we're proposing. And I'll address a couple of the things that Kent brought up today as well. So our goal is to determine a permit process that works for both the municipality and Alaska Communications in order to deploy faster internet to more Anchorage residents while minimizing disruption to Anchorage residents. So this is a potential site map for microtrenching, where the sites we're looking at for the trenching. The blue sites are the sites that would be in the near future, and the orange sites would be further out. But this is just an example of all the places where we think we could use microtrenching in Anchorage to bury fiber for high-speed internet. And this is an example of a site map that we would send to the municipality in the review process. So a detailed map that the municipality could review and approve. As Kent shared, microtrenching is typically, it's actually 18 to 25 inches deep is what we're looking at, and 1 to 2 inches wide. As Kent talked about, you use a flowable fill to reseal the road. This is the machine right here, an example of a machine. This was actually one that we brought up to Anchorage for the demonstration in our parking lot at 600 Telephone Avenue. And then you place conduit in the trench. The conduit, there's actually multiple conduits that can hold multiple fibers. So you really only need one trench for each road. And we are happy to share our conduit with others who would potentially be interested in using them. So next we want to look at some of the examples. This is one that Kent brought up. So Mackenzie Drive is a place where we thought microtrenching would work well. The roadway seemed to be in a place where we felt like the microtrenching would work. And so we performed the test in fall of 2019. These pictures were taken in May of 2020. And we feel like this was a successful test and really an ideal case. You can see it went along the side of the road. The sidewalk is actually not our preferred placement for using microtrenching, but we did want to test it out, and we're fine with not using sidewalks. So I wanted to address that from Kent's presentation. And I also want to talk a little bit about the Cinnabar Loop example. We agree wholeheartedly with Kent and his team that that was not a well done project. It does not meet our expectations, and it is not how we would microtrench. It was done in 2012 and 2013 by a different company using a very, very different methodology. And in fact, in 2012 and 2013, we had evaluated microtrenching, and at that time, we deemed it was not an acceptable form of trenching. We did not think that the system and process and technology was ready to use. And the Alaska Communications test that we did in our parking lot at 600 Telephone Avenue, we selected that site for safety reasons. So the parking lot, the way that the asphalt, it really wasn't an ideal test location to show exactly how the microtrenching would work in a roadway. We really just wanted to show anybody who was interested what the equipment looked like, what the flowable fill material looked like, what the sealant on top looked like, and how the process worked. And we chose a parking lot because we felt it was the safest place to have gathering of people outside watching the microtrenching. And then next we want to talk a little bit about another test that we did, and this was on a private property where we didn't need municipality permits. This was in a Sherwin-Williams parking lot. Again, the work was performed in 2019. You can see the photos that we took just this month in 2020, and we feel like this test also has held up well. The Bering Street test that Kent referenced was another test, and we agree with him and his team's assessment that it did not work as well as we would have liked. As Kent mentioned, we went into that project with some apprehension about that particular site, and we felt it was an opportunity because we did get the permit from the municipality to test it. We thought it was an opportunity to test in a condition where we were a little unsure of the outcome. We didn't think it was the best site, and it turned out that we were right. It was not the best site. We are in the process of fixing it right now. We received the permit to do that work this week, and the work is now underway. And it was a great example of why we need to partner and collaborate with the city to select the best sites for microtrenching. We don't think every site in Anchorage is an ideal candidate, and that's why we want to work with the municipality in a really collaborative manner. And this is our proposed process for working with the municipality. So we want to look at what's the viability of microtrenching in a given area. What does the road bed look like? Are there road sensors there? What do they look like? What is the road design and maintenance plan? And then once we determine that a site's viable, we plan to do a geological survey. We'll of course coordinate with the permitting agency. And as you saw the example earlier, we'll submit a detailed drawing of where we plan to put the fiber. There'll be a project design phase. We'll look at duct requirements, the exact microtrenching dimensions, and finally go through the permitting and community notification process to complete the project. We really want this to be a win-win for the city, for our residents, for our company. We believe this is an innovative way to change how we're putting fiber in the ground. It is not the only methodology that we will use, but we think it's just one more tool in our toolkit. And if we can reduce the cost to put fiber in the ground, that means more Anchorage residents can get access to that fiber, whether it's to support 5G builds in the city, or it's to support getting high-speed internet to businesses and Anchorage residents. We know that now that's more important than ever, and we want to collaborate and work with the municipality to make that happen. So with that, I'd love to take any questions that you have.
Great, thank you so much for that presentation. So if members have any questions on either presentation or either for ACS or our municipal folks, please feel free to get in the queue. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heather, could you address one of the last points that the city made about, they don't understand how this would work or why this ordinance is necessary. They think it might be a mandate to do microtrenching. Can you speak to that?
Yeah,
specifically?
Yes, happy to. Thank you for the question. So we've worked with the municipality for almost a year now, trying to sort through the process, and we have not made much progress. And so we feel that an ordinance would help make this a priority for the city, and we could actually start getting projects off the ground and going through the permitting process as we've outlined.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Kavanaugh.
Thank you. And it appears that I missed a presentation. So I am going to go ahead and go to this last, hopefully, presentation, and then I'll go back into the queue. So Mr. Dole.
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Dole's presentation is on a pretty different issue. I mean, it's all one ordinance, but...
Okay, great. Well, then we'll go ahead and stick to the queue until we're done with this issue, and then we'll go to Mr. Dole's presentation. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Dunbar kind of touched on my question, but it feels like from the two presentations that this still feels premature for an ordinance with regard to microtrenching, and that there are still some issues to be worked out. I understand it feels like maybe we reached an impasse, but I guess I would hope that without an ordinance, we'd be able to get past that impasse. So I don't know if Mr. Kohlhase would want to address that or ACS, but I'm struggling with why we need an ordinance.
Through the chair to members Zolotel, is Kent Kohlhase again. Certainly there is I think a difference in the expectations on how quickly we proceed on this. So we do have a draft agreement from Alaska Communications that would set some framework and parameters for how we proceed with microtrenching. We're reviewing that now. We have met with them this summer several times, a couple times at least, and they presented a work plan of, I don't want to misstate, but 30 or 40 streets, perhaps more. And based on the concerns that I've already talked about, we pared that down and counteroffered that we would allow or would be agreeable to proceeding with 10 or 15 streets. And I think that's really the last real discussion we've had on proceeding. But we are open to it. We just want to, as I said, make sure that the municipality's interests are protected. And this is, even though it's been around since apparently 2012, it is still new technology, and there is just not a lot of information out there, objective information about installation techniques and materials and the long-term viability. So, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Weddleton.
All right, thanks. A couple questions. One to Kent. When we all drive down the roads and there's cracks in the roads, this rubber fill is often used to fill the cracks that are very common in roads. And it seems like that's, isn't that something that could be done to fill these cracks from microtrenching? It seems like it's been done for decades.
Through the chair to Member Weddleton, I think that is a possibility, and if the chair would indulge me, I believe Paul Van Lanningham, Manager of Street Maintenance, is on. He might be able to speak a little more directly to how effective crack sealing is.
Go ahead, Mr. Van Lanningham.
Yes, through the chair to Mr. Weddleton. Crack sealing, is a discipline that we can do around town to follow around the microtrenching and to keep resealing these. I don't believe most of them would be running parallel with the curb, and most of the cracks that we're feeling are running across the streets. I don't know if we would be able to keep it in such a shallow trench. And then the biggest concern also is not just filling the crack, it's what's underneath the crack. So the surface rideability and keeping that is a concern, but it's not the major concern of maintenance, and that's just being able to get in and do any type of maintenance repairs with shallow depth buries of these utilities. So crack sealing is definitely an option to stay on top of this. It would just be how often would we have to do it?
Well, thanks. I was thinking ACS would do it, not you, but appreciate the points there. And could I do a couple more? I don't know what the queue is. Fair.
Through the chair,
Whatever
this
works
is
for
Chris Schutte. Just a reminder that we have a whole other presentation to do in now about 11 minutes to complete it.
Thank you, Mr. Schutte, for that reminder. I guess before I go back to you, Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Dole, how much time do you need for that presentation?
Mr. Chair, I did it in 13 minutes yesterday. I believe I can do it in 10 today.
Great, thank you. And just as an FYI, we are noticed for this meeting until 12:10, so we do have a little bit longer. Mr. Weddleton, one more question, and then we'll go to Mr. Dole.
No, let's go ahead and move on. Thanks.
Okay, great. Mr. Dole.
Good morning, Bob Dole, Development Services Director for this work session. I have shared my screen with you, and I would like to make sure you can see my first slide. It is a blue splotch with the title of it. Is that coming through?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, suffice it to say that we have concerns about this ordinance. The right-of-way ordinance is, real quick history, it's been back to 1973. It's basically unchanged, both in language and how it's enforced. It's a property interest. Most jurisdictions have in both the main finished area of property used for trafficability or transportation, as well as adjacent strips of property that are absolutely vital that the jurisdiction be able to control what happens and to assure that it's used for that purpose. It's also a tremendously valuable asset of the municipality, valued at $1.78 billion. So reading the AM, it reads, permitting requirements for installing driveways that do not impact the road prism are a burden on builders that bring slight benefit to the municipality. These are the substantive issues you see here that are not acknowledged in the AM. Those sidewalks are outside there, light poles. Drainage is crucial to make sure that the right-of-way drains properly. and that properties, both the one being constructed and others, are not impacted. Long term, if we don't allow for snow storage, it results in increased cost for Paul Van Landingham and Al Chakowski, who's on here, and their staff. We need to allow for space for parking. Sometimes things don't work as planned. Actually, it is vital that the municipality is able to assure that the slope and fixed objects are not a hindrance. And finally, what happens in the right-of-way, we own from a legal basis, even if it's done by a different party. In short, the AM not disclosing these things renders it kind of bankrupt and insolvent substantively in terms of going forward to propose this. Quick lesson on the law on this. At least since 1907, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized the role of jurisdictions in defining what happens both in the right-of-way and access to it. This would ignore over century precedent. Since the 1950s, AASHTO and the Federal Highway Administration and others have been developing the substantive body of access management and road access or roadside issues to make sure that roads are safer and the adjacent areas are safer. We own what happens in the right-of-way. Sawinski v. Walker is instructive on this. This was an Alaska Supreme Court case, basically up along Knik River Road, short version. Teenagers on a four-wheeler, 4 a.m. fleeing down a driveway, a drug deal gone bad, hit a cable that was strung across a driveway, killed 2, left 1 injured. The only reason the state of Alaska was not liable in that case or sharing the liability for that cable strung across that driveway by a third party was it was able to show it was outside of the right-of-way and it was not a dedicated access road. So what happens in the right-of-way, we own. That's why when we look at our peer jurisdictions, DOT through the Alaska Administrative Code, they require driveway permits. Numerous times from the trade association, I expect to be following me here, they've said we should be more like the Matsu Borough in terms of how we do things. They have likewise require driveway permits for just these same reasons. Where I don't think we should follow the Matsu Borough, though, is their new driveway ordinance in the legislative process now is far more prescriptive and allows far less flexibility. So what's this look like out there where the rubber hits the pavement? We're going to look at some examples here of what the municipality will assume liability for if this ordinance is passed as is and the municipality is divested of its authority to regulate what happens in the right-of-way while still maintaining liability. So this case, I think we're starting off with the one 2669 Timberline Drive. Quick saying, while the builders play, the taxpayers pay, and that's what you see here. Even if without a traffic control plan, there isn't an accident with the equipment there. Even if there's now a loss of control in the rubber area, we are liable for the stormwater violation, i.e. the municipality of Anchorage, not independently of the contractor here. And if we are not actively requiring them to mitigate it, we pay those thousands of dollars per day fines to the EPA. The taxpayer does. Another example here of the things that must be caught and why driveway permits are necessary. If you look on the left there, there's no space for snow storage, and also the sidewalk has been eliminated. So for the pedestrian walking on a cross slope when it's icy out, assuming we have winter up here still and slips and falls, it's in the right of way, the municipality assumes liability. Likewise, the lack of snow storage space makes things much harder for Paul's folks in facility maintenance. Another example here from last year, non-ADA compliant. We talked about this earlier. Had there been a slip and fall on this, it would be a municipality liability. Had there been a reconstruction, we would have had to reconstruct this to ADA standards at municipality cost going forward. Because of the permitting processes in place, we were able to identify this and have the builder correct it. Drainage. Drainage is probably more important in many ways than a lot of the other things we see in the right-of-way outside of the road prism. And we cannot say enough about the importance of making sure it's there. Without it, we pose a risk to users of the right-of-way and adjacent properties in a high rain event. It is vital, accordingly, that even though it's outside the road prism, that the municipality is there to protect its legal liability and the safety of other Anchorage residents. In building, there's a saying, if you break it, you buy it when you're putting in construction. The reason in this case, the home builder was the one required to pay for those cracks you see in the sidewalk up front is because there was a driveway permit and we were able to show that the damage was caused by the house going in. If you can't show that the damage was caused during the construction, it's a municipality obligation to pay for it, even if it was caused during the construction. Another example here of a driveway too wide and the necessity for driveway permits. Note how this compromises both snow storage as well as on-street parking space. The AM alludes to the 2-year warranty period for subdivisions as they're going in, and how that allows for making sure things are done right. In the case of substandard paving, though, we don't build our roads for years, we build them for decades. Substandard paving may very well likely not come out within that 2 years, but long-term it will turn into a municipality of Anchorage burden and obligation to pay for it if not detected at the time it was put in. The language of the proposed AO talks about not requiring a permit for work that is done outside of the road prism. These are examples, real world examples of how even that quote work being done outside still creates a real world hazard inside the road prism for other users of it. The lack of a traffic control plan here creates a risk for the pedestrians that have to go around that truck, or for the just the other cars who are going to try squeezing around it, or other things here. It's why we require permits. Another example here we can see where from a hoist, catching them red-handed in terms of doing damage to the sidewalk without being able to show they did it. This would be a municipality obligation to repair that cracked panel you see there. Also, we can see on the left the lack of a adequate traffic control plan. Imagine the kids on bicycles or the senior citizens with walkers going down that street and now have to go out and around into the other oncoming lane of traffic as a result of this poorly executed and what would be unregulated work under the proposed ordinance. We see another example here a little closer up. A pedestrian encountering this has two choices. They can go into the work zone or into the street. Neither of one of those are a satisfactory answer. And even though it's clearly outside the road prism, it is creating a substantial impact on other rightful, lawful users of the right-of-way, but it would be exempt from regulation under the proposal we have before us today. Finally, I want to show another recent one. Rocks in the right-of-way become dangerous projectiles when machinery hit them and go flying. This also highlights the importance of why it is imperative to require those permits and in the associated inspections to mitigate the risk to Anchorage residents, both in terms of their personal safety and in terms of their tax dollars and where they go. Another example, some work was being done in the winter. Besides the cost, even if the contractor, once caught with this destruction, had to pay for replacing the signal box, imagine Old Seward Highway and Diamond Avenue with no lights and the safety and disruption that creates. So in conclusion, I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The current statutes have worked fine for over 40 years. There's been virtually no change in what they do and how they do it. This proposed ordinance increases risk to Anchorage citizens' pocketbooks, to their personal safety, and results in longer-term road maintenance costs for the municipality. Accordingly, we think it is a very poor road to go down. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have about 10 minutes left, so we'll try to squeeze in as much as we can. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Dole. Are there any suggestions or thoughts that you have that could get towards the sponsor's aim that aren't maybe as concerning as what you've presented today? Or is that something you would need some time to spend examining?
Through the chair, Assembly Members Zolotal, as written, there is no adequate foundation for this proposed ordinance. It would take extensive work to recognize the safety interest there. I believe there may be space within existing policy parameters that can be done within the existing ordinance to address some of the concerns. However, if we're going to sacrifice the safety interest or the fiscal interest of Anchorage residents, I don't see a way to do it with this proposed ordinance. I believe what we can do should be done within the existing ordinance.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I would like to hear, I think you mentioned at the beginning that we could hear from members of the home building community who, might utilize this. If there's a representative from them, I'd like to hear I don't know if they have a slideshow, but their version of a presentation.
Sure, we can go ahead. I'm assuming you're talking about AHBA?
Yes.
Okay, we can go ahead and turn it over to someone from AHBA.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name's Brian Harton. I work for Hultquist Homes, and we're an AHBA member. And I don't have prepared remarks, but I don't disagree with all of what Mr. Dole is saying. But I'd point out that maybe there's a lot of those incidences pointed out that are without context, or at least proper context. The first slide that he showed with the loader in the street and mud on the street and the potential for EPA violations. Construction is somewhat messy. Tracking does happen occasionally on the street, but I can assure you on that project that all the BMPs and all the SWIFT controls were in place, and that the mud was removed from the street within hours of being tracked. And I think we are allowed 24 hours to clean up, but we always do it as we're working and definitely at the end of the day. With regards to outriggers and sidewalk cracking and that, I'm not 100%, but the one example I think I saw was in a brand new subdivision, and the right-of-way inspector pointed it out, and it was corrected. That's going to happen with multiple users. That was a concrete subcontractor who wasn't using his brain, but that's not typical of the industry. We know how expensive it is to replace and repair infrastructure, and we avoid it at all costs. And as far as driveway widths, snow storage, and that, the municipality still has an awful lot of control, an awful lot of inspection, and an awful lot of oversight on that through the building permit process. Every new home is going to have a driveway. Every new home is going to have a paved driveway. And those driveways are inspected and measured by building safety in order to get a conditional certificate of occupancy or a final certificate of occupancy. Many times we've had to trim back 4 inches, 6 inches, or a foot because we're at a little over maximum width at the right of way where we connect to from the property line to the back of sidewalk. So that's checked, and the slope is checked also. So it's not necessarily a right-of-way inspector who checks it all the time. A lot of times, most of the time, it's the building safety inspector. So the municipality still has some control there. And then one item that Bob mentioned with rocks in the right-of-way or gravel and whatnot, a lot of times the homeowners, the buyers, don't understand why we neck the driveway down, the throat of the driveway from property line to back of sidewalk. Why do we neck that down? It looks dumb. Why can't we get our full width driveway from our garage doors all the way to the street? And we explain, well, it's municipal code. We have a maximum width that we can go by. And they're like, well, why is that? And we let them know for a lot of the reasons Bob pointed out. It's for snow storage, or it's for this, or it's for that. And So when they get their CO, the homeowner themselves, without a permit, without a contractor, they place the rocks, they widen their driveway, they bring somebody in to pave it. And so a lot of times this happens outside of the normal construction process, and it's not done by the builder, and it's not done by a contractor. It's done by a homeowner who simply wants the extra width. And some of the other examples, I mean, I agree with blocking a lane of traffic on the highway with a pump truck or any of that, but that's not acceptable. But I can't tell you how many examples I have seen coming around a corner and seeing a wall of municipal street sweepers, or a pothole repair crew, or a garbage truck, or a moving truck, or all these other areas and users that don't get right-of-way permits, that aren't subjected to the same restrictions that we are, that exclude themselves. So my contention is usually when we were stopped on a project, we stopped in an alley to offload a truck with some foam for a roof, and we were told you can't do that, you've got to go get a right-of-way permit, even though we were only going to be stopped for 15 minutes. So we had to delay the delivery of the roof materials that day, go get a permit, everything else. But yet a garbage truck, taxi cab, a moving truck, none of these folks have to abide by that. So it's a little overzealous, little double standard. And the purpose of this ordinance, and we're not addressing that specifically with this ordinance. And that's really, I guess the point is that there's still an awful lot of control by the muni outside of right away. And I may have rambled a little bit or gotten off topic, so I'll open the floor back up to questions, or if anybody has any feedback for me.
Thank you. So we're almost out of time, so we can maybe take one or two more individuals in the queue. Not seeing anyone. Actually, Mr. Dunbar, did you have anything else?
No, that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, and then Mr. Weddleton, did you have anything else?
I'd have one comment, and I think Drew Casson from Home Builders is also on there if there's time. But one point, kind of for context on Mr. Dole's presentation is this creates an exception for the permitting, but when the permit for the driveway only, we're talking about driveways, is incidental to an open building or land use permit. So it's not just like it's all by itself. You go out and do a whole new driveway without, a permit. It's just if you already you're building a new home or you're doing other work, this is just part of the project. So I think a lot of the concerns and images don't seem to apply, but not to doubt Mr. Dole's expertise. And if we have time, I'd like to give Mr. Casson a moment. I'd move to extend to give him time. 5 minutes.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Casson.
I'll keep this real quick.
Okay,
John hit one of the points that I wanted to make, which is that this only applies to work that's incidental to an open permit. So it's not like these are going to be things that the building safety department doesn't know about, doesn't know what's going on. The other thing is that it appeared that a number of the concerns, things like the signal box, certainly appear to be an instance in which existing infrastructure came into conflict with the work. That those things are not eligible for this exemption. And so that seems fairly, I realize that it's about making the plan and things in advance, but these are people who are doing these sorts of things all the time already anyways. They are already going through and will be talking about what they're doing as part, because it has to be not just that they have an open permit, but the work in the right of way has to be incidental to that, has to be related to that other work that they're doing. So to just supplement Brian's comments, I think that there are a lot of other opportunities for the municipality to look out for the public interest in these instances, but that the current sort of status quo system doesn't seem to be a good balance.
Thank you. With that, we have this item up before us on Tuesday for public hearing and possible vote. We'll see what we do. This work session is ended. We'll see each other again at 1 p.m.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Felix.